Max Rebo, the keyboard player in the Jabba's Palace House band, has long been a fan favorite, but many people don't know the shocking secret about him that has been hiding in plain sight since 1983. I go into more detail about this and Max's backstory in my Jabba's Palace roll call video about Max Rebo that I made a few years ago. But to summarize, the creatures in Return of the Jedi were first envisioned as concept sketches that were then translated into statues known as maquettes. These maquettes were referred to by sculptors as they created the full-sized creatures. Sometimes there were some differences between the maquette and the final result, such as with Sice Noodles here, who looks fairly different. Here we have a concept sketch for Max Rebo at his piano, and you may notice one thing, and that is that he's playing the piano with his feet. Here's the actual maquette for Max Rebo that was sculpted by Phil Tippett, the head of the creature shop for Return of the Jedi, and as you can see, he not only is playing with his feet, he doesn't even have any arms, just these flippers that we have apparently been misinterpreting as ears. Here's Phil Tippett looking at the maquette as he sculpts the full-size Max Rebo costume, and as you can see from this slightly more further along version, it really does look like legs rather than arms, doesn't it? But because of the way human anatomy works, once you have a person actually occupying the costume, those legs end up looking like arms. Pablo Hidalgo makes this point in his article Star Wars Mysteries, Getting to the Bottom of Max Rebo. And he goes on to say that the issue was further confused when Kenner made their action figure for the character, which looks like a bipedal blue elephant wearing a diaper. In reality, Max should look more like this drawing that Pablo did. He looks more like a penguin now than an elephant, doesn't he? A lot of people have read Pablo's article, and in fact it's gotten to the point that any video I've ever made that includes Max Rebo will regularly get comments saying, actually, Max Rebo was playing with his feet. But I'd like to explore this idea for a minute. It's very hard to deny the evidence that Max was originally intended to be playing with his feet. However, I don't buy into the idea that any bipedal version of the character is wrong. For that to be true, you'd have to ignore all of the bipedal Max Rebo toys that Lucasfilm Licensing has approved over the last 39 years. Like this. And this. And this. And this. And this. Oh, and also this. The company approving all of these items literally owns the character, so it seems a little strange to say that they've been wrong about it all these years. But regardless, I still find the original version of the character to be fascinating. I even went so far as to commission an artist named Kyle Bodette to make a custom statue of Max Rebo in his armless form. I never really expected an officially licensed product of Max without arms to be made, so I took matters into my own arms, so to speak. But of course, all of this changed earlier this year when Regal Robot announced that they would be selling a licensed replica of the original Max Rebo maquette as their first entry in the new Archive Collection. As I understand it, the Archive Collection will involve selling replicas of maquettes and other things that are in the Lucasfilm archives, and Regal Robot has been getting direct access to these and scanning them with a high-resolution scanner and then painting them professionally to make them look more or less the way they did when they were first used in the production of the films. In fact, you can see a nice clear picture of them here. We don't know as of yet exactly which ones are going to be included in the collection, but it's an exciting time for anyone who's interested in the production of the Star Wars films and some of the artistry that went into making a lot of these creatures that we know so well today. And yes, I understand that was kind of a long introduction to an unboxing and review video, but I thought it was important to give some historical context about this so that you'd understand exactly why it's so interesting. As you can see, it comes in more or less the same style box that the other Regal Robot items I've unboxed on the channel have used. And inside is a little insert about the Archive Collection and what it means. If we open it up, you can read a little bit about the Archive Collection and what they have planned for it. You can pause the video if you want to read that or go to their website. And on the bottom we have the signature of Tom Spina, who is the founder of Regal Robot. Now, if we go ahead and take out the first item here on the top, you'll see that it's actually a kind of a nameplate. And this is a good time to point out that there were actually two versions of this item. This is the numbered edition. You can see I've got number 8 there, which is quite low. I ordered very early on. But there's also an autograph edition that was only available at Star Wars Celebration Anaheim. It was autographed by Phil Tippett, who was, of course, the original sculptor of the piece. That would have been nice to have, but not having gone to Celebration myself, it would have been rather difficult and expensive for me to get that version, so I decided to go with the numbered one. And if we remove Max from his bubble wrap prison, we can finally get a look at him, and I'll have to say it's quite impressive looking in person. I really like the contrast between the red balls and Max himself. I've never really fully understood what those balls were there for, and they didn't carry through to the final concept at all, but they do add a nice little contrast to this. As I said, this was scanned from the original piece in the archives using a high-resolution scanner and then cast in resin and painted by hand by artists in New York, as opposed to being imported from China or something like that. And I suppose that does contribute to the cost. It is $3.99. The signature edition was $4.49. And, I can see how people would think that that was on the high side, especially if you compare it with kind of the heyday of Star Wars collecting that I remember from like the early to mid 2000s when you could get mini busts for well under $100. Yeah, it does seem a little high, but if you think of the kind of provenance involved, they had access to the original prop, they had access to Phil Tippett, and, they're doing all this by hand in the US, and this version is limited to just 250 pieces. So I think when you consider all of those things, it's understandable. And yes, I did spend my own money on this. I think they did a good job on the paint. Of course, the goal here is not to make the most amazing realistic Max Rebo ever. It's to replicate the way the paint looked on the actual piece itself. And in particular, I think they're trying to go for maybe how it looked when it was more or less newly created, as opposed to the way it looks maybe 40 years later after it's been sitting in the archive and maybe had some things break off of it or the paint is faded or whatever. So, there's a little bit of room for artistic interpretation probably. But from what I can tell, this does a really good job of replicating that original maquette. The base looks like it might be made out of wood. You can see some wood grain there, but I think it's made out of resin like the rest of the piece. A lot of these maquettes were just kind of on weird chunks of wood and stuff like that, and they weren't really standard looking. So they've decided to go with, as I understand it, this black base for all of the pieces in the Archive Collection, and I think that's probably a pretty good idea. So that's the Max Rebo Archive Collection Concept Maquette. I'm a big fan of Max Rebo as a character, but being able to have this version of him, kind of the origin of the character in some sense, in my collection is really cool. I guess it's a bit like looking at an old Peanuts comic strip and seeing how Charlie Brown and Snoopy used to look very different from their modern incarnations, but we can still recognize them. Oh, shout out to his Max Rebooty, as people have been calling it online. It's a very charming little detail there in the back. If you're interested in getting one of these for yourself, I will put a link in the video description where you can go to Regal Robot's website and get some more information. Thanks for watching. As usual, this video is brought to you with the help of my patrons from Patreon, including these Palace VIPs and Angelica Brady. I really appreciate your support, and if you'd like to see how you can support the channel for as little as $1 a month, check out the link in the video description.